time to tantalize your earbuds with creative makers and shakers. It's Creative Living, the podcast with Jane Klaus.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jane, and this is Creative Living. Thank you so much for joining us today. So the other day, I was reading the AP News. Yeah, I know. I sound real smart, but typically I skim the headlines and go straight to the lifestyle section. And I came across an article that really spoke to me. It was about taking something old and making it new to you again. Here's the headline. Plunder your attic, making the most of hand-me-down decor. I mean, the words plunder, attic, making, hand-me-down, home decor. The writer was speaking of really my love language, and it was just another sign that creative living is alive and thriving, and that there are other people out there that think just like me, because my family thinks I'm nuts because I'm always making something and I'm always saving something. My guest today has been writing about home decor for the AP News since 2008. I am so excited to welcome to the show, Melissa Rayworth. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Jane. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you about this.
Before we dive into the article, one of the best ways to live a creative life is really through the written word. Were you always good at expressing yourself through writing?
I have always been a storyteller, but in my teens and my 20s, I was doing a lot more acting. I was writing some, but I always thought of myself as an actress who was going to write on the side, and I've kind of ended up being a writer who acts here and there. But the storytelling's kind of always been at the heart of what I'm doing. And to me, I actually think DIY projects and home creativity projects in some ways are their own kind of storytelling. One of the things I love is helping people figure out how their home can kind of tell their story. And I think the things we surround ourselves with, that it's part of the story of who we are right now, who we were, and who we're becoming.
So the inspiration behind the article, and again, it's Plunder Your Attic, making the most of hand-me-down decor. What inspired you to dig into this topic?
Well, it's interesting. My editor and I were talking about a combination of things are happening right now. Supply chains are very much slowed down. So often if people are looking for new stuff, it's not available. But at the same time, I think all of us are getting so much more environmentally conscious, and we're thinking, I don't need to have somebody manufacture something brand new and ship it across the country or across the world. Instead, I can either look on Facebook Marketplace or go to a flea market or go to a yard sale, or I can look in my own home or my mom's home or my cousin's home and see what is in the basement or the attic or the garage that somebody thought was beautiful a long time ago, and then everybody kind of forgot about. But it's there under a sheet or in a box, and you can take it out, and you're saving money, you're helping the environment, and you're not dealing with a supply chain issue.
That's what I love about it. It's taking something old and making it new to you again. In fact, yesterday I was at my sister's house, and I've got a lot of my parents' stuff. She's got a lot of their stuff, but I went into the closet and I was pulling out these beautiful watercolor paintings that our aunt painted. Probably, I know, so long ago. You know what? All they need is a new frame, but they're beautiful and they tell a story.
Yeah. And I think what you said about a new frame, I think that's part of it. Someone may have, a painting in their attic that someone else in the family bought a long time ago, and it doesn't seem like it's their style because it's got some really traditional, old-fashioned kind of frame. But you can take that piece out and put it in a frame that works for you, and suddenly it belongs in your house right now. And I think people do worry that they're disrespecting this piece, or they're doing something that's not polite or not right if they do change something up. But it was really interesting reporting this story. Several of the designers I talked to, one especially, said to me, I love the way she put it. She said, you don't honor your relatives or honor these items by just leaving them in the attic because they're not perfect for you. You honor your relatives or the stuff by taking it out and maybe changing it, or at least putting it with something different, but giving it new life.
Just reading the article made me want to just dive into the attic, to the basement, to the storage room, and just pull those things out. We all have those places. We all have Aunt Jerry's plates. We all have these old, Aunt Catherine's photos and Grandma's table. Why do we forget about them?
Well, I think it's a few things. I do think from both the homeowners I spoke with and the designers, I think a lot of people do worry something's fragile or something's precious, so they don't want to mess it up. Like you said, the dishes or the glassware, somebody saved this for all this time, so they don't want to be the one to break it. But rather than leaving it in a box, one of the designers I spoke with had a client who had all this gorgeous green glassware that was vintage and old from her family. And she left it in boxes because she didn't want to damage it because it was precious. But when they remodeled the kitchen, instead of having all closed cabinets, they did one wall with open shelving. So this gorgeous glassware could be up on the wall. This woman could see it every time she walked into her kitchen, but it was safe. It was up on the wall. And if once in a while she wanted to take it down and use it carefully, she could. But it was part of the life of the house, but it still was safe. It was up on a shelf.
I always say you're mixing this vintage or this antique with something modern.
Yeah.
Kind of like getting dressed. You can buy a garment from a thrift store or a resale shop, and then you can pair it. I don't care what you pair it with. I tell people, pair it with a $5,000 couch, but make this pillow or reuse a throw or something that you found just because you've got this juxtaposition of this old and this new. Is that trendy?
I think that's what a lot of designers recommend people do. And I think one of the keys, you asked, like, why are all these things still stashed away? I think a lot of people look at the big old sideboard that their grandmother had in the dining room, and in their mind, they're like, I guess I would have to put this with a whole bunch of furniture just like it. And that's not me. And I don't want my dining room to look like that. But the key is doing what you just described. You take that vintage sideboard, maybe you change out the hardware that's on it, maybe you even paint it, but then you put it with your modern dining table, or you put some kind of modern lamp or modern something on top of it, and it can look wonderful. And now some of your listeners may be thinking, like, what if I do that wrong? What if I mix three things and they look terrible together? Everyone I spoke with, the designers themselves and the homeowners, everybody said, this is about trial and error. And it doesn't take anything but effort, right? There's one wonderful guy that I interviewed in this article who had this antique little love seat, little settee that was his mother had it. I think his grandmother had it. And when he reupholstered it, he and his husband thought they knew where they were going to put it, but they put it in their living room and they both were like, no, that's not right. And he said it took some real trial and error. It literally moved around their house in the Berkshires from room to room until they put it in a guest room, and they both were like, that's where that belongs. Okay. So there's some trial and error involved, but you're not, tiling a bathroom and it's unchangeable. If you put something in your entryway and it doesn't look right, you can put it somewhere else. So you may be worried you'll do this wrong, but that's okay because it's trial and error.
Yeah, I call them creative mistakes because there's no way you can make a mistake when you're being creative, because that's what creativity is. It's about a bunch of left and right turns and mixing all the paints together just to come out with your Picasso or whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah.
Do you find that when you talk to all of these designers and you talk to homeowners, are they more daring, or are they like, yeah, let's make a creative mistake?
Well, I think one of the coolest things I've been hearing in the past couple of years from a lot of designers is that they're less interested in prescribing how everything ought to be. They ask questions. I think the really talented designers say to the homeowners, what do you love? What makes you happy? How do you use your space? So I think as long as you're asking yourself, what do I really want? What would make me happy? I don't think you can do it wrong. I think it's less about worrying that, oh, the trend now is I should do this, and more about what you love. About 10 years ago, I started making some industrial furniture. I started doing like bookcases with big, heavy planks of wood and plumbing parts. And I know this is you see this in bars. A lot of people still have this, but it's not hot right now like it was when I started doing it. And I don't really care. I have a couple of, I made a custom sort of like a bookshelf, but my husband has a collection of vintage typewriters, and I made a special sort of shelving unit for that. And it just seemed to work, that the metal typewriters and the plumbing parts, it all kind of came together nicely. And it wouldn't be the trendiest thing to buy right now, but it makes me happy and it makes him happy. So I think your space has to be just filled with what you love.
Yeah, who cares what anybody else thinks? You just make yourself. As long as you love it,
Mhm.
you're in the right place. Give us a laundry list of some of these hand-me-down items, because I love this idea of all these old typewriters. I love this idea of pipes. And you talked about the couch or the love seat,
Mm.
but give us a laundry list. What can we find in our attics?
I think so many people do have glassware and dishware. And so the question is either start using it. One of the ways to for this article, bunch of different relatives ended up with a bunch of sets of dishes. Some were from her mother-in-law, some were her mom's, different people. And she said she realized she loves this stuff. So throughout the year, she kind of swaps it out. Every few months, she'll put one set of dishes away and put out another one, because this stuff was just, it was there and she loved it. Certainly furniture, you may have ended up with something in your basement that belonged to a relative, but one of the designers I interviewed, she's from an Indian family. She had a gorgeous orange silk sari that had belonged to her mother, and she loved it. But she said to me, I don't have a lot of occasions to wear a sari. But the fabric is spectacular, and the hand sewing of these golden threads. She said she just loved it. And it happened that her husband's favorite color is orange, and it occurred to them that in their living room, they could hang this incredible sari up as a piece of art, and they had just a plexiglass sort of box made to put around it to protect it. But she said every time she walks in her house, she sees this piece of clothing as a piece of art, and she loves it. I remember years ago, one of my favorite designers who I've interviewed quite a lot is Brian Patrick Flynn, he does a lot of like the incredible giveaway homes for HGTV, and he's on Magnolia Network. He's amazing. And years ago, Brian said to me, what about all the favorite t-shirts you have from college? What if you got somebody who sews to make them into pillow covers, and you had a couch in your family room that has a bunch of pillows on it that's those t-shirts in college? Most people wouldn't think of that, but it's inexpensive. There's got a local tailor or seamstress who can do this for you, or maybe you know how to do it yourself. These things you love that make you smile suddenly are part of your day. So I think interestingly, even clothing or fabric, can become art or can become a piece of decor.
But the idea of really anything can be repurposed, anything can be upcycled. And especially if it's something that belonged to your family, it tells a story. It has meaning. It's speaking to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And also be that these things are wonderful quality. It's interesting. I know, like, growing up in the 70s and 80s, we didn't replace everything every few years. Like my family, the dishes you had growing up, those were your dishes. And in terms of furniture and different things, stuff stuck around for a long time, partly because it was made so well. Sure, you could order a brand new press board, sort of prefab, not quite hardwood, not the best construction. There might be something in your attic that you could repurpose, or in your cousin's attic that they'd love to get rid of because it's still sitting there. And the quality of it's going to be far better.
Especially the furniture. I find that I have a rocking chair for my mom. My husband is like, we are not keeping this rocking chair, and it's in storage. And a man who's a woodworker had a storage space next to mine, and he saw that and he's like, oh, do you know what that is? You know who did that? You know what the wood is? And he said, do you know how precious that is? And I'm like, I know. Now, I didn't know of the wood and the value, and I figured it was well made. But here's a guy that was an expert that told me it meant a lot to me because it had all of the meaning behind it, and because it was my mother's. And I feel the same way about so many items that are these hand-me-down items, even with your china. And people nowadays are setting their table with mismatched pieces of china because that's very trendy. Are you finding that in some of your pieces?
Yeah, well, and so that's the other thing. So say you have, this box of china that was your grandmother's, but a few things got broken along the way, or everything is not still there. I do think a lot of people love to do a table that, maybe you're mixing two different styles, or maybe you're mixing some really ornate china and then totally white plates. I think there are a lot fewer rules. Just like, a few decades ago, somebody would have said, well, this year we're all wearing really chunky heels instead of spiky heels. Like, you hear so much less of that now. I think because partly because people are doing what you do, and there's so much more information about creativity out there. People are like, I don't have to just say, oh, it's 2022, therefore I have to do X. It's much more, if you love it and it looks beautiful together, go for it. Now, I do hear from some designers that they have clients who say the most front-facing rooms in their house, their living room, their kitchen, those they're a little more aware of the eye of whoever else is coming in, and they want to make sure those spaces, they may not take their big risk there. But so I often hear designers say, take your design risks in your bedroom or in your guest room that only like your closest relatives and best friends are going to stay in, or in a powder room that's a small space. So you're like, I'm going to get a little crazy with the wall color or the wall covering because it's just this little space and no one's in there for more than 10 minutes. So I can get a little crazy.
But maybe that will inspire the person who's using the bathroom or sleeping in the guest bedroom to get a little bit creative on their own. I mean, the idea of this podcast is to inspire people to create. Now, I have tons of people who are sewers and quilters and woodworkers, and they're already doing creative things. But there are also another group of people that are like, I maybe don't have to sew it. I don't have to whittle the wood, but I can come up with the idea.
Yeah.
And that to me is inspiring you to be creative. And what you're doing with your article is saying, hey, go into your attic, go into the basement. Let's repurpose this and make it new. And let's put it in the house and see what other people think.
Well, seeing what other people think is such a great idea. You may have a friend who's really crafty and creative who says to you, here's what you should do with that. Or if I were you, I would put this in that room. I think if you don't want to do it yourself, you can either have somebody help you, or there's all those incredible people on Etsy or in other places where you can be like, hey, could you make me, I have this t-shirt, or I have this old Christmas sweater, or I have whatever. Can you turn it into something for me? And those people are totally out there.
Yeah. So I sew, but I always tell people, try it. If you can't sew, staple it. You can't staple it, glue it. You want to glue it or hand stitch it, bring it to the seamstress down the street, or ask your friend that has a sewing machine to do it for you. And that goes for anything, even with design, because you can seek out authors and writers like you to get inspiration. You can watch TV or listen to designers, or you can ask a friend and design it yourself. But I think the most fun is to repurpose those items.
Yeah. Absolutely. Because you may have 2/3 of the project already finished and it's in your basement. And once you pull it out, you realize I think one of the things that so often I've heard designers suggest is if you have an old, really nice wooden piece of furniture, but it's not your style, taking off the hardware, stripping it, painting it a color. Like you're allowed to take this old brown wooden piece of furniture and paint it with a shiny black lacquer and then put really modern hardware on it as drawer pulls or door open or little door handles and turn it into what you love. And really, I think most of us, I never dare, I don't do any electrical DIY around my house. There's certain things I don't dare, but anybody can take this piece of furniture out into their driveway if they have one, put down, a tarp or something, strip that off, or even just scrub it well and then paint it. Like we all can do that. It's just effort. It's just effort and creativity. And taking off the hardware is easy. Putting on new hardware is easy. And that tends to be a pretty inexpensive, a quart of paint and some new hardware for a piece of furniture is not going to cost you that much. And now you have this totally modern, totally fun piece that is, it has that story. Like you said, it connects to where it came from and how you got it originally, but you've made it your own.
And it's fun to tell the story behind a piece that you have, repurposed. I love the idea of you're allowed. A lot of times we'll have family heirlooms. We're like, well, I'm not allowed to do that. Mom said I can't. But guess what? You are allowed. You just said it. I have this beautiful old dining room table with the china cabinet, and I love it because it was my parents from the 1940s, probably. But so many people have sat there and had parties and they enjoyed the time. My ancestors that are not even here anymore. I want that in my house. Yeah. My husband and I, our style couldn't be any more different. And so right now I'm trying to really massage the idea to him to let's repaint it. Let's change out the hardware. And for a long time, I thought I can't do it, but you're saying that you're allowed. It's okay.
Several of the designers I've talked to have said, people tend to need someone else's permission. And it's often the designer who says, it's okay to do this. You can do this. Now, for those of us who don't hire someone to come in and help us decorate our space, which is most of us, yeah, I think it's great if we kind of give each other permission and say, it isn't better to leave it in an attic or to give it away because it's not, or sell it because it's not your style. Although it was interesting to hear some of the designers say they've often had to say to a client, you have permission to do that. If you find 5 things in the attic, you can get rid of 3 of them and keep 2. That's okay. And that is easier than ever. Now, there's a number of things. The house we mainly live in Pittsburgh was built by my in-laws. We moved here to help them when they moved to assisted living. And so much of their stuff stayed here. And we still have a garage full of stuff. My sisters-in-law have taken the stuff they wanted. We've still got all of these things from the past 15 years. And we're just beginning to say, you know what, we might put a few things on Facebook Marketplace. For my husband, I think it was a lot to make the decision. But of all the stuff, say, that your parents had, that your mom had, she didn't love every piece the same, right? So if you keep a few things that she adored, she'd probably be like, go ahead, get rid of the ones you don't love. That's okay. Let someone else love it.
Do you know my mom?
Well, it's funny, my mom was not a DIY person at all. But when I was a kid, she kind of, in some ways, showed me how much you can do with your spaces, because I shared a bedroom with one of my sisters. And every few years, my mom had grown up in a family with a very small budget. And every few years, she would take down our curtains and she would throw them in a big bucket with some dye, and she would change the color of them. So she didn't have to go buy new curtains. She just would dye our curtains. At one point when we were little, we had these wicker headboards. She would take them out in the backyard in the summer and spray paint them a new color. And that was sort of the extent of her DIYing. But our bedroom suddenly had these different headboards and different curtains. And then she would say to my sister and I, okay, you guys, where do you want to move the furniture to? And we would, drag our beds over to another spot and put our dressers in another spot. And it showed me that it's mainly effort and some creativity. It's not usually money that can change your space. I mean, sure, if we all would love to sort of, we do look at the HGTV dream house and stuff like that, and we're like, wow, if I had that budget, what would I do? And that's amazing. But there's so much you can do just with effort and your own ideas.
The original upcycler, you just reminded me of this when you talked about your mom, is Julie Andrews in The Sound of Music, when she took down those curtains.
The curtains, yes.
made the Van Trapp family kids those little play outfits, right?
Yes. I guess it was the first time they performed, they wore stuff that she had made from the curtains or something like that. I do think past generations, people kept things. It wasn't like everything was brand new. One of the things I loved about the design watching the TV show Mad Men was that everything wasn't from like 1962, 1963. You could see stuff, like there was stuff that I remember that my mom had that she had gotten like in the 50s. Like those rooms were all filled with stuff that some of it was super modern, but some of it was from the 50s or the 40s or the 30s. And you could see all that. They did such an amazing job on that show. And I think that's a thing for us to remember, that people's houses, they didn't used to just have everything brand new. We're so much more disposable these days that we're like, oh, sure, everything in my kitchen is, only 5 years old. But that was not the case for so long, and it doesn't need to be.
But not to mention all of the supply chain issues. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is getting very serious. So now is the time to talk about those hand-me-down home decor items.
Yep. And it's the time to go to estate sales and yard sales in your neighborhood, or look at Facebook Marketplace. And especially if you're able to do like a local pickup where you're actually getting something from one of your neighbors. So nothing's being shipped from anywhere.
Yeah. So talk about, if you don't have an attic full of cool stuff, where can somebody go to find all of this antique vintage items to redecorate their home?
Well, this is the time of year we're getting into yard sale and flea market season. And that can just be such a fun way to spend a day, even if you don't even know what it is you're looking for, to take a look online and see where there are a bunch of yard sales happening in your neighborhood. I think probably starting this coming weekend, we're going to have a whole lot of weekends of people, neighborhoods. And I think because of social media, more neighborhoods are getting organized. And instead of just one house having a yard sale, the whole street will kind of get organized, and they'll make sure on the same day a bunch of people are all doing it. So you can kind of have your one-stop shopping. But as I said, things like eBay and Facebook Marketplace can be really useful. With Facebook Marketplace, you can look and just take a look at things that are local pickups, so that you're not worrying about paying for shipping or waiting for something. And yeah, it's amazing to see what a neighbor or someone else not too far away has that they don't want anymore, but it's exactly what you need. And usually the prices are quite low.
I mean, you don't know what you need until you go to that yard sale and you go to those estate sales. One of my favorite things to do with my mother-in-law is we go to Buffalo, New York, and we go to the estate sales. And I'm like, oh, let's get this and let's get that. You just find all these treasures. And one of the things I love, not only when I have my own family treasures, but buying somebody else's treasure, I want to know what the family was doing when they were using this carafe, or who sat in this chair. Like, to me, the stories.
Right. And you never know. If you are at an estate sale, you may find someone there, or a yard sale, who can tell you. But if not, like you said, it's sort of a fun mystery. You've got this thing and you wonder. One of the designers I talked to for this story said the most wonderful thing. She said, if you are feeling a little bit guilty about the fact that you want to reupholster this big, beautiful chair that belonged to your great aunt, take a picture of it. And when you have it reupholstered, have a print of that photo upholstered inside the chair. And that way, even if you're not around, even if it's now another 2 generations ahead, and then someone else goes to reupholster it, they're going to find that photo in there and realize the history. And this is when she described that, I thought, oh my God, you could actually print, you could write sort of the story of this person who bought this, or whether the story is really about that piece or the people or all of it. You could print that out and make that a part of that piece of furniture.
I love putting the photo inside the reupholstered piece of furniture, put it underneath the table, because we look at these things like where they were from, where she got them. Melissa, based on your research, what is the hottest trend for home decor in 2022?
Well, it's interesting when you look at like the colors of the year that the different companies are coming out with. I think everybody wants peace and calm. I think obviously it's been a challenging few years in the world, and it still is right now. So we keep seeing, gorgeous wall colors that are, or furnishing colors that are calming and relaxing. And kind of joyful. I mean, I think it was interesting this year for Pantone to do Peri Peri, which is like this lovely purpley, really joyful color. I think people want to feel happy at home. I think the other big thing that's come out of the pandemic is more conscious use of our space is a big trend that we're seeing.
And is that the secret to making your home more beautiful and peaceful, and a place where families can be together and just pursue their career goals and their personal goals and just find joy?
Yeah, I think it is. It's about making sure that your home supports whatever it is you're trying to accomplish or you want to be doing. Like you said, either making sure your home really has a relaxing space to be with the people you love, or has a space where you can pursue the creative thing you really want to do. I mean, making sure your home is serving your needs in that way. And granted, and I'm sure you talk about this all the time, like obviously this is a privilege thing, right? Because there are plenty of people who are like, right, no, I don't have so much space that I can say, oh, how do I want to use this room and that room? But I think as tiny as your space may be, and again, as limited as your budget may be, there are always creative things you can do to make it feel more you.
So tell us, Melissa, you are a creative writer and you're always talking to people who are doing home decor projects. Are you a DIYer? Are you a maker?
I am. In fact, one of the projects I do quite a bit got started because I did an article about doing it. And as I did it myself at home, I realized how much fun it was. My husband and I grew up both reading like comic books in the 70s, and he still loves comics, and he had all these vintage comics. I've started making coasters and trivets with actual page, like decoupage, actual pages from 70s and 80s comics. But then heat treated so that you really can put like your hot coffee mug or something else on it. And it is so much fun to do. And I have some guilt about when I'm actually cutting up, because the panels, the artwork is so fantastic. And sometimes when I'm cutting up a page, I'm like, should I be doing this? But instead of it being in a box in my basement, it becomes something. And, sometimes I'll do a craft fair or something. Often I just give them to people as gifts. But my neighbor was like, my sister-in-law is obsessed with Chris Hemsworth. Can you make me like a Thor trivet so she can like have Thor in her kitchen all the time? And I was like, sure. It is so much fun to to play with all this stuff.
I know how hard it is to tear apart things like a vintage comic book. I actually had a box of love letters from my parents, and I had these there, and they both passed away. And I had this box of love letters, and I cut them up and I put them on a lamp, the lamp that was on their bedside. And I decoupaged it and I covered it and I sealed it. And then all of a sudden I said, why didn't I just make copies of this beautiful letter and cut them all up? But now I have them, and I have them in a special bedroom, and I have their love lamp.
And the light glows through it and you see those words. Oh my God, that is beautiful.
Isn't that lovely? Talking about creative living and creative living at home, what are your words of wisdom for our listeners to get creative in any aspect?
So much of it has to do with learning. A lot of the work I'm doing these days, a lot of the writing that I'm doing is about families and education. And I think as adults, we forget that just because you're, out of high school, done with college, it doesn't mean you can't always be learning. So I think when it comes to being creative, often the first step is there a class you want to take?
So the bottom line is just start, whether it's creative writing, cooking, DIYing, fashion, learning, educate, it's just start the process. Melissa, how can people reach out to you? How can they find you? How can they read more of your articles?
Go to breadcrumbstories.com. You can find me on Twitter at @mrayworth. And you can always find me at melissarayworth.com.
Melissa, thank you so much for joining us on Creative Living.
Live better, creatively. For more inspiration, visit janeclouse.com. Thank you for listening.